Hello everyone, my name is Stonesy Boy and welcome back to Reading with Stonesy. Today we are doing the same amount of read that we normally would, with it being page 141 to 160. So without further ado, let's begin. As they passed open doorways, Arthur occasionally glanced into rooms and he felt moved to do so. Some rooms felt heavy and somber, and Arthur said a prayer for the patients and families in them. Some rooms felt illuminant, sometimes even more evanescent. The people in those rooms didn't need Arthur's help. They understood the truth of the journey ahead. The E prayed for them. Anyway, you could never have too much support. Nurse Ackerman led Arthur past room after room. So how far along the long hall had he wondered if they somehow passed through an invisible barrier into another hospital? The longer they walked, the denser the air felt. The worse it smelled, too. Arthur was used to the hospital smells. It smelled bitter medicine, sharp urine, fatigued waste, and pungent antiseptics. But this was something else, something acrid and ancient. The patient you are about to see, Nurse Ackerman said, is a special case. Arthur almost jumped out of his skin when Nurse Ackerman opened her mouth. He was already surprised by her escort down the hall. He hadn't expected her to speak, too. She's barely spoken to him the last time he was here, and then to only give him the room number and send him on his way. Her voice was sharp, and her appearance held a disturbing semblance that made his hair stand up. On the back of Arthur's neck, every consonant sounded like it was spitting on and then stabbed with a forked tongue. She continued. The man has been on life support for years. How many years? Arthur asked. Nurse Ackerman's shoulder blades rose in appearance. Irrelevant, she snapped. He's been here all this time? Nurse Ackerman ignored Arthur. When the state finally took him off life supports, why did the state do that? Where's his family? Nurse Ackerman whirled around and impaled Arthur with a searing look. He has no family, she nearly shouted. Her tone suggested Arthur should have known that somehow. Yes, he'd done a little research on this place. Talked to a couple colleagues, but he had heard of any special case. Nurse Ackerman rubbed at a large mole under her left eye. She took a breath, turned away from Arthur, and resumed talking. Arthur glanced back over his shoulders, be sure he wasn't still in Hercules Hospital, and would be able to find his way back to Ruby. At this moment, his bicycle seemed impossibly far away. As I was saying, the state took him off life support, Nurse Ackerman continued with the air of someone long suffering. Even so, he wouldn't die. A miracle, Arthur said with a quick prayer of thanks. Hardly. The word sounded like a shot reverberating off the stark white walls and closed doors around him. Closed doors. Arthur looked at the old-fashioned, wide, six-panel dark oak wood doors with frosted glass windows. All the doors were closed in the end of this hall, and none but the panels revealed light within the rooms. Why? Arthur opened his mouth to ask, and then thought better of it, and remained silent. Nurse Ackerman stopped before the door and looked strangely darker than all the other doors they had passed. But the glass panel indicated the room's light was on. He glanced up to check the overhead lights. Was one of them out? Before he could confirm his suspicion, Nurse Ackerman pushed the door open. He's in here, he said, not necessarily. Arthur glanced at the number by the door. 1280. As soon as the door was open, the origin of the smell Arthur had noticed was obvious. This came from whatever lay in the hospital bed at the other side of the room. Up close, the smell was even more noxious, and it was more easily discerned. It was a smoky smell, but it was not like any smoky smell Arthur had ever encountered. It was like the smelling burning meat, smoldering plastic, and molten steel all at once. Arthur picked out the stirring odors of carbon and sulfur. What was in this room? Arthur didn't have long to ponder the question, because Nurse Ackerman stepped aside and made a sweeping hand gesture at the bed in front of her. She reminded Arthur of those women on game shows, the ones who had outwardly indicated potential prizes. Lying there, and the man had come to see. Arthur stopped breathing. He clutched the door jamb. He ordered his legs to keep holding him up. His patient could not be called a prize, except perhaps in hell. Arthur had seen a lot of horrible things in this texture as a priest. He'd been into car crashes, airplane crashes, and all manner of natural disasters. He prayed over people's missing limbs, missing eyes, missing large chunks of their bodies. He'd seen so much disfigurement and physical horror that he would have, until this moment, been apparently confident in saying he'd seen every misery that could thrust upon the human body. But this wasn't the appearance of a man alone that took Arthur's breath away. It was what? Not the smell, not the incongruity, not the impossibility. Arthur's brain begged for oxygen, and he remembered to inhale. sucking in a lungful of rancid, decay-tinged air. Arthur wiped at the tears that suddenly filled his eyes. They weren't emotional tears. These eyes were reacting to the puzzling acidity in the room. Arthur worked his tongue around in his mouth, gathering up enough saliva to speak. He looked at Nurse Ackerman and noticed that her eyes were squinted and her nose was more pinched than usual. "What's his name?" Arthur asked. "We don't know. No family has claimed him. He has no records." "What about fingerprints?" Arthur asked, and then immediately realized that was a stupid question it was. Nurse Ackerman let out a gurgling snort at Arthur's supposed pass for a laugh. "A DNA sample was taken, but it matches no individual in an existing DNA database," she said. Arthur nodded. "As you can see," Miss Ackerman continued, "he has a brain function." She gestured to the monitor open with a series of jagged green lines played across the dark green. "That's an REM sleep pattern." Arthur stared. He'd take her word for it, and all tall, spiky lines meant nothing to him. According to Dr. Hanner, the hospital sleep expert, that particular REM pattern indicates nightmares, horrific nightmares. Arthur's gaze, which had been locked on the man in the bed, whipped to Nurse Ackerman. Was there just a little too much glee in the tone when she used for horrific nightmares? Yes. Her mouth twitched at the corner as if she wanted to smile. Arthur frowned and raised an eyebrow at him. An overhead speakers right outside the door, room 1280, blasted out. "Nurse Ackerman, please come to room 907. "I'll leave you to it," she said, "but I'll be back. There's more for us to discuss." What they were discussing? Arthur didn't feel like he was discussing anything. All he was doing was trying to accept what his senses were telling him. He was also trying to remember his training, his humanity, and his decency. Nurse Ackerman's footsteps slapped the floor and retreated down the hall. But Arthur didn't let go of the door jamb. He knew he needed to. He had to enter the room, but not yet. First, he wanted to see if he could get his brain to understand the facts that reported to being real. A disconnect that had bridged it before he could step into the situation and do something, anything besides whimper like a small child. A man. Really? Could Arthur really call this a man? It wasn't more than a corpse than a man. Well, no. Some of the facts were considered designation of corpse. The REM monitor, for example. Fact 1. The man appeared to be burnt to a crisp. That lay in bed in 12 room 80. Resembled a human being very in that exquisite shape. It had a head, a torso, 2 arms, and 2 legs. There, the similarity to humans ended. Fact 2. The burning had been so severe, so complete, that the only thing remaining was essentially a charred skeleton. Almost. Actually, Arthur wished the man was just a charred skeleton. If he were simply blackened human bones, he'd have been easier to look at. But the ruinous fire damage would have been throughout the body. Although he had no hair, the man did have skin. Or was it skin? Arthur had never seen anything like the dermis on the man. It looked like a fire had scorched away at so many layers of his skin that it was just an ashy covering far too translucent for comfort. Arthur guessed that fire was siphoned all moisture from his body's covering, leaving it with extensive cracks, like the surface of a dried-up lake bed. Through those cracks, Arthur caught unwelcome glimpses of uncharred tissue. Fact 3. The man's organs worked, at least the ones Arthur could see, and that in and of itself was repellent in ways Arthur had never experienced before. Though the translucent skin cracks, Arthur could literally watch his man's disintegrate and blackened heart pumping. He could see the heart-shriveled lungs expanding and contracting. He could glimpse the seared kidneys and the bladder so carbonized it seemed like it was about to collapse in on itself. Fact 4. The man had no face. A hole in his skull indicated there was a nose there used to be. Dark, cavernous pits, lacking eyes, looked at nothing. A toothless mouth gaped without lips to protect it. Fact 5. The man did have a brain. The REM pattern suggested this, and unfortunately Arthur could see bits of gray matter between the cracks of the man's burned cranium. Fact 6. The man had blood flowing in his veins. What looked like scorched worms creeped above through toasted tissues, pulsing under the skin around the crisp skeleton. Arthur assumed these were veins. The blood on the sheets seemed to confirm it. Fact 7. And this is the most disturbing fact of all. It was a culmination of the other facts. It was the fact that Arthur couldn't fit into his understanding of the world, his understanding of the universe, his understanding of the power that governed everything. This was the fact that this man was alive against all odds. What was he? Arthur returned to his original question. Was this patient a man? Again, brain function would suggest he was. But what truly determined humanity in life? The soul. Did the gruesome collection of bloody, incinerated human remains have a soul? Arthur decided it was time to enter the room. After all, it was his job to find out. Peeling his fingers from the door jamb and rubbing them to put life back into him, he took the hesitant step forward. Arthur could hear his second rush The respiration even over the sound of the monitor's rhythmic beeps and wheeze to click the man's impossible breathing. Stopping, Arthur looked around the room for the first time since Nurse Ackerman had opened the door. There wasn't much to see. The room was a white-walled, like every other room in the Hercules Hospital. The man's bed sat in the middle of the room, surrounded by monitors. On one side of the bed, an IV pole held one pouch of, fluids, nutrients? Did the man need either? An IV line ran into the port tapped in the man's radius, or his ulna. Arthur couldn't tell from where he stood. Even though he wasn't on life support, the man did have electrical leads affixed to his head and his heart. It was surreal to see the life-affirming equipment attached to what looked like something in a morgue. The man even had a pulse ox monitor in his left index finger bone. How was that working? Pushed off to one side of the bed, a high black paddled vinyl visitor's chair next to an empty rolling tray. The chair was positioned so its user could use a narrow window that overlooked Hercules' possible parking lot. The wall opposite the window held a whiteboard. In other rooms, you might see medication schedules written there, but this one was clean. Next to the whiteboard, an LED X-ray viewer hung over the wall. When Arthur stepped over the window, he looked out and saw a long driveway he and Ruby had pedaled up just 20 minutes before. Why did it feel like it happened in another reality? Maybe in some other lifetime. Standing by the window, Arthur suddenly felt an icy rawness bore a hole in the middle of his back. The feeling was so powerful that Arthur spun around awkwardly, reaching behind himself, trying to rub the assaulted area. What was that? It felt like something was trying to reach into his soul. You felt it, didn't you? Nurse Ackerman was back. Felt what? Arthur asked. You know what? Arthur ignored the nurse and sat down in the vinyl chair. He couldn't look at the man quite again. So he looked at Nurse Ackerman. Her uniform pants were too short. He could see her black socks for an inch or so off white skin, even them and hem in her pants. We'd be remiss if we didn't warn you, she said. We? Myself, Nurse Thomas, and Nurse Colton. We've worked in the hospice wing the longest. We know that he wrinkled his nose at the word, what that is. And what is he? Arthur stammered. Evil, Father Blythe. Evil, pure and simple. Arthur shook his head. Just because he looks like that, that's not the evil, Nurse Ackerman cut in. He waved her hand a revolting mass in the bed. Then what is? It's what made inside of that. Inside, as in under the bones, in the organs? Nurse Ackerman flicked her hand as Arthur was asking stupid questions. Who cares what's in there? She shook her head and sighed. I knew you wouldn't believe me. Opening a file Arthur had been noticed she was holding, she crossed an X-ray viewer. There, she slapped 3 brain scan images into place and pointed. Look! Arthur gingerly stepped around the man's bed as if it might attack him. Nurse Ackerman lifted her chin toward the brain scan. See? There. She pointed at the scan. And there. Arthur leaned forward, had no idea what he was looking at. I'm sorry, you need to explain. Nurse Ackerman sighed. These are coronal, sagittal, and cross-sectional scans of the man's brain. Can you see the same thing in all of them? Arthur couldn't. So he said, you'll need to tell me what we're seeing. She sighed again. Our brains have 4 lobes. The frontal, parietal, occipital, and temporal. She tapped the area of each strain. Unless the brain has a tumor or damage, some of the trauma, like an injury or stroke, signals to each of the 4 lobes will be relatively coherent. Although this man shows no sign of tumors or brain injury, the lobe signals aren't coherent. She tapped the scans again. Arthur focused the sagittal scan, which showed the man's brain in profile. There he could see what it looked like. 2 different colors and textures in each area. He pointed at them. Is that what you're talking about? No, Zachary nodded. Your doctors believe each lobe of the man has 2 distinct electromagnetic signals. This is unheard of. What does this mean? Arthur asked. Nurse Ackerman made a chuckling sound. The doctors claim they don't know, but we know. She gave him an eye roll and clearly indicated he was daft. Me and my fellow nurses. What do you think it is? We don't think, we know. What do you know? 2 signals. She jabbed each lobe. Mean 2 living things, 2 entities. We're both vying for control of the brain. That's why they're present in all the lobes. But they're at odds with each other. We think they're tormenting each other. Arthur had no idea what to say to that, so he blurted out the first thing came to his mind. Where's the evil? Nurse Ackerman threw up her hands, then waved the scans. There! How can one brain have competing signals? It's the very playground of evil. Arthur thought maybe Nurse Ackerman would visit a different wing of the hospital, perhaps the psychiatric wing, but no, that wasn't kind. He should have more empathy for the woman. Anyone who was taking care of a man in the room was entitled to have a crazy theory or two. At least, she and the other nurses had a theory. Arthur had nothing. And nothing but his faith. Every man was good in him, Arthur said. But that's not a man. Okay, every living creature has a good in it. Nurse Ackerman reached out and yanked the scales for the viewing box. I knew you wouldn't listen. Arthur turned and looked at the man in the bed. That's my job, to see the good. Nurse Ackerman only shook his head and walked out of the room. Mia pulled a flimsy beige plastic chair out of one of the round tables in the staff break room. The room contained a small fridge, a counter, a microwave, and half a dozen tables and chairs. It smelled like a barbecue sauce and spoiled cheese. If Maya hadn't been so hungry, the smells would have ruined her appetite. But she worked up such an appetite so strong she could have eaten her lunch in a sewage treatment plant. Mia opened her bag of lunch and pulled out a turkey sandwich her boyfriend had made her that morning. He was so sweet. She put up a paperback thrower in front of her and opened a cola. She took a bite of the sandwich and washed it down with cola, noticing the do's and don'ts posters tacked over the plain white walls. They didn't make her feel welcome, nor did it make her feel any better about her decision to take the job. It was a stepping stone, right? That's what her boyfriend said. Keep your nose clean, do your job, good job, and you'll be moving up in no time, he said. Mia took another bite of the sandwich and chewed appreciatively. That's when her new boss, Nurse Ackerman, and two other big-wing nurses of the hospice wing marched in. Mia immediately dropped her head and pretended to be reading. How long was he been in there? Nurse Thomas asked, flopping in the chair table behind Mia. Mia could smell her lavender-heavy perfume. Father Blythe? Nurse Ackerman said. All morning, moron. Two chairs scraped the floor as Mia knew other two nurses had sat too. Nurse Colton was right behind Mia. Already, Mia had noticed several times that Miss Colton needed a stronger deodorant. Mia had already planned on listening to whatever nurses said. When she heard Father Blythe's name combined with moron, he tuned in more closely. Father Blythe was a very nice priest who had walked her up and started her new job. He had been so kind and patient with her. He was cute, too. Not in a boyfriend kind of way, but in an adorable old man kind of way. Short and slight, with slick, wavy gray hair and gentle brown eyes. Father Blythe looked like a grandfather Mia wished she had. She liked him immediately, and made her mad to hear someone call him names. Nurse Ackerman was a moron. Mia had learned early in the nursing school that not all nurses were nice. Some were so unpleasant, Mia wondered why he had gone into nursing in the first place. But Nurse Ackerman was the worst she met so far. The woman was just plain icky, never smiling, stalking around and firing orders. Nurse Ackerman showed immediately that Mia wasn't going to get anything from her new boss except for criticism and judgment. And that what was it with the losing last names? We use surnames on this wing, Nurse Vermont. Nurse Ackerman said when Mia had introduced herself as a friendly, I'm Mia. Fine. Mia didn't want to be friends anyway. And then there was Nurse Thomas. She was nice enough that there wasn't much there. Mia wondered how Nurse Thomas managed to keep her job. Round and sweet looking with her curly graying black hair. Nurse Thomas looked like she should be at home baking cookies. She called everyone sweetie and she loved to pat people on the back. But she wouldn't remember to bring her feet along if they were attached to the ankles. Already at morning, Mia had spent what seemed like half her shift finding things that Nurse Thomas had lost. Nurse Colton was the only reasonable, normal nurse Mia had met so far. In her mid-40s, Mia guessed, Nurse Colton was not an athletic-looking woman with brown hair, chopped short in a boyish cut, and a gray tan. She was nice enough, Mia supposed, that she was too serious, as if she had something heavy on her mind. Mia picked up her sandwich to take another bite. What did you tell him? Nurse Colton asked Nurse Ackerman. Well, we know. I told him there's evil inside the man. Mia held a sandwich in front of her face. Evil? He refuses to see it, of course. Nurse Ackerman said dismissively. Well, we know better, don't we, sweeties? Nurse Thomas said. I can barely think about it without being so scared I want to throw up. Yes, we know better, Miss Colton said. Nurse Ackerman got up and plucked a plastic bag of the carrots in the fridge. No wonder she's so skinny, Mia thought. He's idealistic, Nurse Ackerman said. I am too, Nurse Thomas said. But then the writing's on the wall. It's on the wall. Mia took a bite of her sandwich and willed herself to be invisible. He's new, Miss Colton said. He'll catch on. I'm not so sure. He's determined, Miss Ackerman said. Time will tell, Nurse Thomas said. It always does. The nurses chatted for a few more minutes about some of the patients Mia had already met. She wondered what the man with the evil inside. Was he a patient? He must be if Father Blythe were visiting him. Or maybe Father Blythe was visiting someone else. Mia listened, but she never heard another word from the priest. Did she need to find him and warn him? But warn him about what? It sounded like he had already been warned and didn't believe the warning. Father had been sitting in the vinyl visiting chair for over 3 hours. During that time he accomplished a little, except that he could now look at the man in the bed without nearly losing his breakfast. He made him feel slightly better about himself, with the self-congratulation of his unearned. Arthur knew his belly was empty now, so he had no breakfast to lose. And he had no business being pleased, either. He hadn't yet been able to approach the man's bed. He was still completely repulsed, not by just the man, but by the bloody sheets he lay on, whatever it was leaking from the tubes snaked out from underneath him. Attached to heavens knew where, those tubes curled off into the bed and ran into bags hanging on the bed frame. Arthur could hear the body waves dribbling into plastic that were regrettably see-through. Arthur didn't venture to look ever since Nurse Ackerman left. Arthur hadn't said one word out loud. All he'd done was stare and pray. Now he decided he had to do something else. What if the man wanted to communicate? Arthur had no idea how or even whether it was possible, but he did give him a chance. Sitting in his chair, 5 feet from the bed, he was not giving a man a chance. Arthur took a deep breath and scooted his chair a foot closer. Yes, that's very brave, Arthur muttered to himself. He chuckled. One of the monitors let out an unusual beep, or rather a normal beep on an unexpected time. In 3 hours, Arthur had learned the monitor's rhythm, and now the rhythm had varied. Was it because he talked? Breathing shallowly through his mouth because he got closer to the man, the words, the smell were. Arthur dragged the chair nearer to the bed and made a screeching sound to the floor, but the monitors didn't react to that. Arthur got the chair within a foot of the bed, just outside the distance he thought the man could reach. He knew it wasn't friendly or caring, but Arthur wasn't ready to risk touching or being touched by the man yet. In the 3 hours he sat there, he realized that part of him, a truly traitorous part of him, had believed that Nurse Ackerman had said was something evil keeping the man alive. Just thinking that disturbed him greatly. How could he be a priest, believe that evil is more power over body than good? What if someone good was keeping the man alive? Wasn't that more believable? Of course it was, he told himself. It was divine energy that created worlds. Couldn't that energy sustain life beyond time when life was viable? Certainly it could, although Arthur's logical side argued divine energy wasn't the only kind of energy in the world. Stop it, Arthur admitted himself. The monitors beeped out of rhythm again. You can hear me? Arthur asked, scooching the chair closer to the bed despite himself. The monitors beep stuttered. The man in the bed didn't move. Arthur leaned forward. My name's Father Blythe. No, forget that. My name is Arthur. Is there anything I can do for you? I just want to help. The monitors beeped erratically for several seconds. Arthur had a silent prayer, asking for strength. Divest me of habitual notions of what is and isn't good. What is and isn't possible. Let me see past my senses are telling me. Give me the strength to see this man as the love I know he is, and help me interact with him accordingly. Arthur sat still and took several slow breaths before reaching out and taking the man's scorched finger bones in his hands. It required every ounce of his heart not to recoil in the dry, raspy phalanges in his hand. He felt like he was holding hands with a tree branch that had just come through the forest fire. No, that wasn't true. It was worse than that by far, because in addition to the snobby hard object in his hand, he could feel the pulsing slither of the man's veins beneath the parched skin covering. Give me strength, Arthur prayed again. He must have gotten it. It was the only explanation for why the scream when the finger bones and veins had felt he held moved. He did, however, drop the hand. He was human, after all. Was it because he was polite, or was it because he was afraid of whatever entity had moved the fingers? Entity? What is he thinking? It wasn't an entity. This was a man, hideous circumstances. It wasn't a foe to be vanquished. He was a human being, worthy of love. You are loved, Arthur said. He could feel the truth from his words, couldn't he? Actually, he wasn't sure. He usually felt a flush of warmth and a surge of lightness when he had those words, but now nothing. The man, however, felt something he must have when he began moving his index finger. At first, Arthur thought the finger motions were random reflexes caused by nerve firing indiscriminately. Then he realized the finger motion was purposeful. Could you do that again? He asked. He didn't let himself wonder how the man could hear him. The man had no ears. And Arthur didn't want to look into the stored tissue at the side of the man's skull or to see if his endurance or whatever else might be made possible to translate vibration into sound were still intact. Apparently the man could hear him, because the feeder repeated the motion. Arthur watched closely. "It's an F," he said excitedly when he realized the finger had written a letter in the air. The finger stopped. Arthur took the information. Just a second. Arthur dug out his satchel and pulled out a small pad of the paper and pencil. Opening pad, he wrote down F. And that's the end of that. But yeah, I think you can tell easily that that is William Afton. But again, that's just a theory. A book theory. But yeah. I hope you guys have a fantastic, wonderful day. People like Big Fish, and make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And I'll see you guys next time.